The House Committee on Natural Resources is holding a legislative hearing to discuss the future of Puerto Rico's commonwealth status. The committee is hearing testimony on two opposing bills, the Puerto Rico Statehood Admission Act and the Puerto Rico Self-Determination Act. Both pieces of legislation were introduced in March and gained bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate. Several key Puerto Rican politicians are testifying, including Governor Pedro Pierluisi and the Citizens Victory Movement President Manuel Natal Abello. Joining me now for more on this hearing is independent journalist Andrea González-Ramírez. Andrea is also the founder of the Latinas in Journalism Mentorship Program. Andrea, welcome. Great to have you with us. So, walk us through this hearing and remind us what these two bills are and why is the Natural Resources Committee holding a hearing to discuss them?
Yeah, so the Natural Resources Committee oversees territorial issues. So this hearing specifically is to look at two different bills. One of them, the Pro-Statehood Admission Act, would basically allow Puerto Rico to vote again in a binding referendum. And that way, if statehood yes wins, then President Joe Biden would basically sign a proclamation welcoming Puerto Rico into the Union. A second bill, the Self-Determination Act, basically creates a status convention. In that case, Puerto Ricans would vote for delegates who then would come together and create alternatives to the current status. So whether that's statehood, independence, free association, or another decolonizing option. And once the delegates negotiate with Congress on these options, then Puerto Ricans would vote again on what status they want. So the hearing basically is for the first time in a long time to examine what a bill would be better. And then that way Congress can vote on it and, decide what Puerto Ricans want to do.
And Puerto Rico has held referendums on the island's future for decades. This is not the first time this is coming up. But is this moment different from past attempts to resolve Puerto Rico's status?
Yes. So in November, Puerto Ricans voted in a non-binding referendum that basically asked, do you want Puerto Rico to be admitted into the Union, yes or no? So just like a very, very basic question on statehood. Statehood won with about 53% or about 655,000 votes. And this had not happened before. The only time that statehood had won in a referendum was 2017 when it won with 97 or so percent. But that case, the referendum was really boycotted by all the other alternatives and every other camp. So participation was only about 23%. So people don't really count that one. So that's the one, the thing that's different. For this first time, statehood won with a definite yes. And because Puerto Rico has undergone a series of cascading crises under the last couple of years, right? Like Hurricane Maria, the debt crisis, earthquakes, COVID-19. There's more awareness at the national level about the colonial status. So the statehood movement and the self-determination movement both have more momentum than ever before.
Mm-hmm. And you recently wrote an article about all of this, sort of explaining why resolving Puerto Rico's status is so complicated. And one of those reasons that you point to is nationalism and a very strong sense of Puerto Rican identity. So walk us through how this identity plays into the island's status and, what the plurality of Puerto Ricans feel about their nationhood.
Yeah. So Puerto Rico was first invaded by the United States in 1898 at the height of the Spanish-American War. And despite over a century of colonization, Puerto Ricans still hold on to their national identity pretty strongly, right? When people hear La Borinqueña, which is the national anthem, they get much more excited and much more patriotic than they do when they hear the Star Spangled Banner. The national language is Spanish, only maybe 30-something% of people in Puerto Rico are fully bilingual, even though English is taught in schools. There's so many ways in which Puerto Ricans are their own people, and you would really hard pressed to find people who identify as American first. Though those people definitely exist in the island. So in many ways, Puerto Ricans are, yes, American citizens, but they also have their own history, their own traditions, their own language, their own customs. And this complicates the idea of, being part of the union, right? Like, even though Puerto Rico's a territory or a colony, depending on who you ask, like, this is a very separate identity. So in many ways, there are people who say, like, they don't want to be a state because that would mean that then English is the first language, or that something like what happened in Hawaii would happen, where, Native people have been displaced by people who come from outside, and, are there concerns that Puerto Rico could become like a tax haven for the rich? And all of this are like really valid concerns that complicate the conversation around status, because there are people who do love their relationship they have with the U.S. They want to maintain that relationship, but they have not decided whether that's via becoming a state or whether that's via continuing the current status quo.
It is complicated indeed, and your article does a great job of breaking it down. Andrea González-Ramírez, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.